We will jump in and begin our wonderful special evening tonight. Welcome to the 12th and final session of the CEC 100th Anniversary Celebration Series hosted by the Council for Exceptional Children in Illinois. Today, August 10, 2022, we mark the 100th anniversary of the Council for Exceptional Children. We celebrate the legacy of Elizabeth Farrell, who was born in Utica, New York in 1870 and died in October 1932. Professor Kimberly Cody Sutton introduced us to Elizabeth Farrell in her book, Elizabeth Farrell and the History of Special Education, published by the Council for Exceptional Children, Arlington, Virginia, first edition in 2002 and the second edition in 2017. The legacy of Elizabeth Farrell is alive and well in our world today. This evening, we paid tribute to her living legacy in Illinois. Beverley Johns will begin this session with a presentation on past innovators in special education in Illinois. Joyce, Meyer, and Kerbis Cantor will provide a response. We will conclude this section with April Anderson-Zorn, Illinois State University Archivist, who will discuss the archival work on the ICEC archives at Illinois State University. Melissa Taylor will discuss present innovations in special education in Illinois, and Cody Pullium will provide a response. Finally, Jamillah Gilbert will discuss her view of future innovators in special education in Illinois. We will conclude this session in celebration of Elizabeth Farrell's living legacy in Illinois and beyond. We activate the value of the Council for Exceptional Children in our own professional lives and join in the work of CEC and ICEC. As president of ICEC, I welcome your presentation, your participation warmly as we work together collegially and always seeking best practices in the spirit of Elizabeth Farrell. And now, Beverly, over to you. We welcome all of you who have taken time out from your evening here on this special day in August. And we will hear about the past innovators in our field as presented by our colleague, Beverley Johns. And welcome her warmly.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It really is very, very exciting when you think about it that today is the day, the 100th anniversary of the Council for Exceptional Children. And it's my pleasure and honor to talk a little bit about the history of the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children and the field of special education in Illinois, because Illinois has a very, very rich history. And so it was really pretty exciting for me to go through the photos and the files that I have. And this is just a small portion of those. So, but tonight, I really also want to dedicate this session to this very dear lady, by the name of Gloria Calavini. And what you need to know about Gloria Calavini, actually, she just died in the month of July. And she was our oldest living president of ICEC until her death. She was president of Illinois CEC in 63-64. She received the Outstanding Contributor Award in 1974. She worked with Ray Graham. So we hear a lot of stories about Ray Graham, but we don't hear as many stories of her. And she did so much positive for the field of special education in Illinois. She also was a manager in the Department of Special Education with the Illinois State Board of Education. And then after she retired from the Illinois State Board of Education, she started direction service for the Illinois Alliance for Exceptional Children, which was the first information and referral system that we had for students with disabilities. I go back to her picture because my session is about lessons we've learned from different people and the camaraderie. And Gloria taught me the wonderful lesson. And as a matter of fact, I used it the other day and somebody said, "Excuse me?" And I said, "Remember, 3 by 5 it." And the person said, "What on earth are you talking about?" Well, 3 by 5 it was Gloria's point that when you talk to a legislator,
Yes?
I think she'll come back. I'd say it's just her temporarily frozen, I think.
I heard, the last thing I heard is when you talk to a legislator.
Yeah.
Should I try calling her?
She's okay. Bev will give her time, Iris.
Well, to break the awkward silence, I will jump in here and encourage you all to check out the link I also provided underneath the professional development link. This link will take you to the pre-registration for our 2022 ICEC convention taking place in Naperville this fall. We would love it if you could join. We have a great program. Again, the link is right here, and it will take you to the program, pre-registration, and all the information that you need. And we would warmly welcome you to come.
Thank you, Cody. That was very good. Yeah, the ICEC convention will take place November 3, 5. That's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we have a wonderful lineup of people. Thank you, Bev.
sorry about that.
Okay, Bev, we did some.
Internet. Okay, we're gonna start again.
Yeah, you were telling us about the 3 by 5 cards, Bev.
3 by 5 cards. Okay, so now can everybody see my screen? And I apologize, my internet went out. Okay, so again, Gloria's message was 3 by 5. Your message needs to be as succinct as possible. So I thought I'd just do a little bit of what I think is very interesting. Obviously, I am from Jacksonville, and it's important to know that Jacksonville is the home of the Illinois School for the Deaf and the Illinois School for the Visually Impaired. The Illinois School for the Deaf started in 1846 with 4 pupils. Then in 1849, we had what was called then the Illinois Institution for the Education of the Blind, which was opened in 1849. 2 separate programs, and interesting that they are both in Jacksonville and started very early. Then in 1900, Chicago was the first community in the state to take action in special education needs. Look at the term that was used back in 1900, subnormal pupils. And then we had services in Peoria, Elgin, and East St. Louis. So, just a little bit of the really early history of the organization as well. So I'm going to see if I can. Okay. And then in 1909, we had an ungraded class was formed in Joliet to accommodate children who for any reason did not fit into regular classes. So very early history. That's why I say Illinois has a rich history of special education. Now, so we had also, Ray Graham was appointed assistant superintendent, director of special education by Vern Nickel, who was elected the state superintendent of education. And that was in 1943. Then in 1948, from records from Bob Abbott, we had the Illinois Association for the Education of Exceptional Children, which was the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children. In 1957, some of you are on here and you in fact are still work in joint agreements. In joint agreements, we had a law that started them in 1957. And then in terms of university training programs, Illinois State Normal University graduated its first 3 teachers in special education in 47. And here is another exciting piece, because we had special education personnel reimbursement for many, many years, and it first started in 1957, and it was $3,000 per. So a school district would hire a special education teacher and they would get reimbursed $3,000. And then it went to $5,000, and then it went to $6,250, and then it went to $8,000, etc. And Iris and Joyce are probably going to talk more. We had in 1959, the first Exceptional Children's Week was held in Chicago. So that came about as a result of the work, the wonderful work of Clarissa Hugg. So then in 1961, Ray Graham died, and he was followed by Vern Frazee in 62. And today we still have the Ray Graham Memorial Fund, which in fact funds projects for chapters as well. So the ICEC newsletter, which would be on, and then we had the quarterly, which at one time Illinois CEC had a journal, the quarterly, and we also had a newsletter, and I'm going to talk more a little bit about that history. So, and then the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children had, again, that name in May 59. Russell Duffin was the first elected president in 1950 of the Illinois Association for the Education of Exceptional Children. And in 63, by then, our student CEC was going, and Illinois student CEC members who came through and pulled for national, just like the Exceptional Children's Week started in Illinois, student CEC started in Illinois as well. Just a rich, rich history in this state. Just a little bit more. In 65, the State Advisory Council on the Education of Handicapped Children was created. It is still in existence today. It is very different than it was back then. And Sam Kirk was the first chair. And also on there was Dolly Hallstrom, who was an absolutely fabulous advocate for exceptional children, and Larry Villamont, who was a director of special education up in the northern part of the state. Also on there was Marion Dodd, and Marion Dodd was very active in Learning Disabilities Association, and she represented parents on the State Advisory Council. And a very important lesson that I learned from Marion Dodd as from Dolly Hallstrom, as from all of those folks who were involved in that first state advisory council, is that if you are representing people, you need to get input and you need to be out there talking to people to see what their needs are. And then in 1963, and there's a little bit of dispute over this date because some would say it's 64, but here is what started in the state of Illinois also. Sam Kirk was at a meeting with many parents of children who had learning disabilities, but nobody knew what was happening with the children in terms of what they needed to learn, etc. So Sam Kirk is in this meeting with people at the Palmer House in Chicago, and he says, what we need to call this group of children who are very bright, but have processing deficits and are underachieving specific learning disabilities. And specific learning disabilities was founded by Sam Kirk at the Palmer House in Chicago. Which is very, very exciting. So this year we will be celebrating that anniversary as well. We had a wonderful test instrument that then became out of favor, known as the ITPA, which came out of the University of Illinois, where Sam Kirk was. And the ITPA was the Illinois Test of Psycholinguistic Abilities. I still remember in my early days in special education, taking around my little blue box, if you will, that had a holder, and running around giving the ITPA, because it did give you a lot of valuable information, but it became out of favor. And then in 1965, there was a state law mandating that students with disabilities ages 3 to 21 had a right to an education, and full implementation of that was in 1969. So my first teaching job was in the winter of 1970. And I always think of my little Sally, who until this law was passed, she was coming to my classroom for children with autism for the first time at the age of 10 years old. She lived in a small community in Southern Illinois. Her mother had 10 children. Sally had an she had cerebral palsy, she had significant behavioral problems, and she was nonverbal. And until there was a law that said she could go to school, she did not get in the school door. Every year, Sally's mother, who was a wonderful advocate with her 10 children, would take little Sally to school, and the principal would look at Sally and say, oh, no, she can't come to school. She has too many disabilities, take her home. Mother would take her home. And so this went on until she was 10. Now, what do we know about the importance of early intervention? So Sally was my impetus to be an advocate, because I wanted to make sure that what happened to Sally would never happen to another child. So Sally really has driven my career in special education. And by 66, we had 80 joint agreements. Now, here was an exciting thing. In 68, we had fellowships for graduate work in special education, and those were being funded. I happened to be the recipient of one of those fellowships. I had finished undergraduate work in Louisville, Kentucky. I had worked my way through college with quite a few experiences working with children who were adjudicated delinquent already. And in a community center, actually had my first gun pulled on me working my way through college. My parents went to their grave never knowing that story, because if they'd known that story, I probably wouldn't be in the field. But anyway, I made it. So, but there were fellowships for graduate work. I applied for one of those fellowships. I heard from I applied, a woman working with kids with behavior problems, because that's where the focus was. You possibly do that. well, want to make a bet. So I'm still in the field of working with special education, students who have significant behavior problems. And I'm going to turn my video off because I'm still getting a weak signal. Okay, so 1971, learning disabilities by itself was added to the school code as a separate category. And then in 1978, Joe Fisher became the state special education director, did many, many positive things that I'll talk more about. And he was the state director. Gloria Calavini was a manager, as was Gail Lieberman, a manager as well. So, and some of this information is from the historical records also of Bill Whiteside, who was at SIU Edwardsville. So early presidents of CEC from Illinois, obviously we've already talked about Sam Kirk, the father of learning disabilities and coined the term, and then Ivan Garrison. And not to brag, but Ivan Garrison was the director of special education. Actually, the first year I came to Jacksonville, he was my boss. And he was the president of CEC, but he used to tell the story that it was a lot different to be the president of CEC back then because you didn't run for office. In fact, you were called and said, we want you as the president of CEC. So anyway, and then Ray Graham and our own Pam Gillette was, who was the superintendent of NSSEO, was the president of CEC in 94, 95. So, oops. All righty. And then Christy Chambers was the president of CEC in 2013. And Susan Fowler did legislative. She was the president also of CEC. I put this picture here because probably none of you will remember this. Maybe Iris and Joyce will, but this was John Porter, who was a congressman of very well-known congressman. And when we would go to Washington, DC, if CEC was held there, we would have receptions. So it's just kind of fun to look at some of those pictures. In the front row is Christy Chambers, Judy Meeks, Rhoda Diamond.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just fun to see them. So then these are pictures again, one of John Porter. Also, that is John Porter's staff member. But this is the importance of history and equity. I will, every time I'm in a meeting, as a matter of fact, I was on a phone call yesterday and I said, excuse me, that appears to be an issue of equity. That's Bob, because that was Bob Abbott. And he firmly believed in preserving the history. And so he was the historian for the Council for Exceptional Children for Illinois until unfortunately, his untimely death, which was a shock to so many of us. But any of you who have ever served on the Illinois CEC board, when he would get upset, he would say, you are not talking equity. You are not being equitable. So those was a very important lesson, and he lived that lesson. And then we had the mother of learning disabilities, and that was Dr. Janet Lerner, who is the author of the seminal textbook on learning disabilities. And people often ask her, why were you the person to write the textbook on learning disabilities, which is now in its 13th edition? And she would always answer that her story was, she was asked by Sam Kirk to write the book on LD, and she did. The lady was a prolific writer because I had the privilege of being a co-author on the last 4 editions of that book. And Janet Lerner was a very good writer. And if she gave you a deadline, you better meet the deadline. But I always remember that she would still, when we needed somebody to go testify on learning disabilities, we called Janet. So she did a lot for the field of special education and was still doing a lot for the field of special education in her late 80s. So that was very important. Now, communications were a big thing in the early days of the the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children, and we actually had a journal, which was the quarterly. I probably in our garage have every quarterly that was published. And in the far picture, you will see Jackie Crane. And Jackie Crane had worked in the Springfield Public Schools, and then she went on to work at the Illinois State Board of Education. Brilliant, brilliant lady. And she was our editor of the quarterly for a number of years and contributed a great deal to Illinois CEC. And then over here is our newsletter. And Bill Vickers was the editor of our newsletter for many years. And here's what he always said to me: Bev, I don't care whether the material looks fancy and has all of this graphic design. The key point is you have to get the information out to people, and they have to know what you're doing. So Bill Vickers was a wonderful friend, and again, taught that lesson. And then there were all kinds of national networking and competitions. When I was the president of Illinois CEC, we had a contest with California about who was going to be number 1. Well, it was quite the competition, but guess what federation was number 1? Illinois. So we won a lot of wine, and I should have taken a picture because I actually still have in our refrigerator the bottle of wine that we won as the number 1 federation in the country. So here with me, if you see, that's John Hess, who was from my home state of Indiana, and he later went to California. And then we have Andy Berg, who is very active in California. And we have Bob Henderson, who died again not too long ago, who was a huge contributor to the field of special education. And there was Bill Bogdan. And if you got a memo today, you may have gotten it from Bill Bogdan, because he was a former president of CEC and active on the history committee, and Bill Littlejohn. And Bill Littlejohn was a former president of International CEC as well. So then we had leadership at CEC. So here is a picture of Mary Camp, who is one of our former presidents, and she is there with Robin Brewer, who was president of CEC from Colorado. And CEC has kept the tradition. She and I were in DC for leadership training, and CEC has kept that tradition for many years, along with having, they used to call it the PAN meeting, Political Action Network, and now it's the Children's Advocacy Network. And then these were always, we had fun get-togethers at CEC. So I just pulled that picture as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about subdivisions, courage, and dedication. And this dear lady who is pictured here with me, Dr. Therese Hogan. She was for many years an outstanding professor at Dominican University, which used to be called Rosary College. And she was very active in the Illinois Division for Learning Disabilities. This is one of the best speakers you ever want to hear. She
Yeah.
was fabulous when she talked about teaching math and talking about, what do you mean you're going to borrow from this column? You're not going to give it back. And borrowing means you give something back. So I can still remember that. But this picture was taken at the last Illinois CEC convention that she was ever at, because unfortunately she died at an early age of breast cancer. So she was a phenomenal lady. People would rush to get into her sessions.
Yeah.
Because she was so wonderful. And then I just had to say, but this is my dear friend Elizabeth Mackey. And this was at an Illinois Council for Children with Behavioral Disorders conference, one of our subdivisions. And I'm happy to report that Illinois CCBD will be celebrating its 40th anniversary this in 2023. So that's pretty exciting. And then we had an installation tradition, new officers coming in. So you see Linda and Liz and Mary Camp and Bethany and Beth Bobel there. And then I want to talk about grassroots activism. We learned that chapters are extremely important. This is a picture taken at a chapter 99 meeting that we had. And the tall man is Bob Leach, who was also a former of Illinois CEC. And then Barb Austin, who was very active also in Special Olympics. But the next man is Jim Riley. And Jim Riley just died not too long ago. Jim Riley actually was a state legislator. And so he had come to speak on issues of state legislation. And then he also was an assistant to the governor at one time as well, from Jacksonville. And then we had more grassroots publicity. This is from the newspaper. And we were always putting articles in the newspaper, and other chapters did that as well. But you see, we were proclaiming Exceptional Children's Week, and Pam Gillette was there in Jacksonville. So that was pretty exciting as well. Then we had key speakers and long-term involvement, because here you see Paula, and you also see Dr. Michael Gerber, an outstanding scholar in the field of special education. I rate him right up there with Dr. Gerber, Jim Kaufman, Doug Fuchs, some of the big names in special education who still engage in very profound conversations on a listserv that many of us participate in, talking about the issues that we're all facing in the field of special education. In terms of state activism, I have to tell you that Neil Hartigan, when he was the Attorney General for the state of Illinois, established the first ever disabled persons advocacy division anywhere in the United States. And that was in 1983, and it was used as a model, if you will, for other states. And it's still active in existence, still going, meeting monthly, etc. Our first job being on that disabled persons advocacy division was working to pass the CHIP bill, which was a comprehensive health insurance program. Everybody united, worked together to pass a bill that would allow all people to have health insurance, because many people at the time, if they had a disability, they had no health insurance. So it was a really important piece of legislation that passed. And then years ago, and you can barely see him, but I just had to pick out these pictures because I don't know whether anybody remembers Bob Leininger, He was the state superintendent of education for many years. He's now retired off in the state of Kentucky. But we had every year what we called Donate a Day. And we would all come to Springfield, Illinois. And during that particular session, we would meet at the State Board of Education. State superintendent would tell us what the issues were. We would train people on how to go over to the Capitol and talk to their legislators. And then that's what we would do. And we called it a Donate a Day because we all donated our time to come together. And then more legislation. And I pulled this picture up because it brought such a wonderful memory. This is, we were meeting with a legislative staff member, and that was Dr. Leslie Graham. And Dr. Leslie Graham did so much for the field of special education in Illinois. She was at Bradley University, and she kept the students going as well. We also incidentally had some leadership training at Bradley University as well, thanks to Leslie. Unfortunately, again, she had an early death, but her only child, her daughter is, some of us still keep in touch with Courtney. And then lurking. This was one of the most important legislative lessons that I learned from a man by the name of Joe Ballard, who worked in Washington, D.C. for CEC. And he said, Bev, you got to be lurking. And I said, huh? What do you mean? We got to lurk. And he said, you got to hang around. So if there's a hearing going on, you better be there, and you better be hanging out, and you better be keeping your ears open and your eyes open about what's going on, because you're not effective in the legislative process unless you're lurking, hanging out, and being in the room with a number of people. And then, as my friend Vinnie Hall would say, if they don't invite you to the table, bring a folding chair. So it was an important legislative lesson. And then this was ISBE involvement when reviewing legislation. You'll hear people say, oh, this piece of legislation is going through the Illinois General Assembly and we think it's pretty good. Well, maybe it's good and maybe it isn't. So remember early on, I told you about Joe Fisher was the director of special education at the Illinois State Board of Education for a number of years. And years ago, the State Board of Education received a grant. And the grant was for people who were in the field to come to the State Board of Education for an internship. And so you applied for it, and they took 2 people, and people were there for like 3 months at a time, learning about the intricacies of the State Board of Education. And I got one of those internships. Of course, my previous superintendent, the school district said, you know what, you can go do this internship. And yes, it's an honor, but you have to get all your IEPs done beforehand. And I was a supervisor at the time, and I had to get 400 IEPs done in a short amount of time, but I did it. So anyway, Joe Fisher assigned me, as the biggest favor he could have ever done for me. He assigned me to review pieces of legislation. And now, if you will notice, that's Donald Gill in the picture, who was a state superintendent of education. This was during a time, was in the early 80s, when they were talking demandate, deregulate, block grant. Not good terms, let me tell you. Every time you hear one of those terms in legislation, you think, oh no, this is not good for special education. So Joe Fisher gave me bills to review. And he said, I want you to review these pieces of legislation and give me a 3x5 summary of them. So, okay, I can do this. So he gives me one day this bill to read. And the bill looks innocuous. And I think, oh, this isn't bad at all. This is a good piece of legislation. And guess what the last sentence in the bill was? Remove Article 14 from the school code. You may not know what Article 14 of the school code is, but I'll tell you what Article 14 of the school code is. It's all of special education. One sentence at the end of the piece of legislation that looked innocuous was this sentence that would have wiped out all of special education from 1969. I mean, so would have been very devastating. So I learned at the time, you better read the bill. And somebody says, oh, that piece of legislation says this. You say, how do you really know that? Have you read the piece of legislation? And now it's easy to read legislation because it's right there at your fingertips on your computer through the ILGA website. So I was forever grateful for that assignment. And then this was Friends and Fun, a family affair, because Illinois Council for Exceptional Children really became part of, many of our families. The people that we met through CEC, we are still good friends. Some of you the people in the costumes, that's Jim and Judy Meeks, who remain very, very dear friends of ours. Donna Ree, and then up in the corner we have Petra Harris. So many people, and the Archies, Maisel Archie, who was a past state president. But that was so much of the importance of the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children. We would come together, we would meet, but we would also have a lot of fun as well. And then the importance of promoting membership. I was telling Paula this story this morning. First of all, that's Willie Scarborough in the picture, very, very active in Chicago, chapter 10 chapter. And next to her is a man by the name of Rusty Welch. And Rusty Welch was the head of membership for the Council for Exceptional Children for many years. He also came to our state, did leadership training a number of years. But here is what he said. Carry a membership form with you at all times.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Never leave home without it. So we happened to be with a group of us that were together for leadership training in Springfield at the feed store. And we're standing in line with Rusty. And Rusty starts up this conversation with a perfect stranger. And he starts talking, and the person asked him what he did. And so he Council for Exceptional Children. Well, this lady spilled out that, oh my goodness, yes, we have a nephew who has a disability. And Rusty said, well, you might want to consider membership in the Council for Exceptional Children. And he whipped out, he had these little membership cards that weren't even 3x5 size. They were smaller than that he always carried in his pocket to promote membership in the Council for Exceptional Children, and always spread the word about what the Council for Exceptional Children did. And then Mr. ICEC was Robert Abbott, awarded in 1972, and Mrs. ICEC, even though we were not related, was me in 1993. And we also did, and we still have in Illinois CEC regions, but we used to have regional workshops in all of the regions. So those are just some of the pictures. And again, you see Charlie Zemer and Leslie Graham. Charlie was a school psychologist, and Leslie was a professor at Bradley University. So So, and the other picture in the top that you see also is Alice Gutenkopf on the left and Nancy Curtis on the right. And Nancy Curtis was the treasurer for a long time in CEC. And then we had Exceptional Children's Week, very exciting, started in the state of Illinois. You see Clarissa Hogg, the beautiful pictures of Clarissa and Iris, and the gentleman, well, the tall gentleman was Jim Bailey, who was from Quincy, Illinois, but the other gentleman was Fred Weintraub, and Fred Weintraub was the director of governmental relations, working closely with Joe Ballard for a number of years.
Yeah, a lot of years.
Fred Weintraub not only knew legislation, but he could present it well and make it so interesting that you wanted to listen to everything he had to say. He did a lot of good also for the Council for Exceptional Children. I did bring this one up because Jim Meeks was the president immediately after me. And one of the important lessons that Jim Meeks taught me was that you have to give recognition to people and you all have to work together. And I occasionally hear people say, oh, certificates, no big deal. People don't want those certificates. Believe that people do want recognition for everything they do. And Jim Meeks was probably, the star on giving recognition to people. So never, ever underestimate that. Very important. Convention planning. This is a picture. I couldn't find too many. Jean Preston is the second from the left in that picture. Jean Preston is from Southern Illinois. She lived in Murfreesboro. And Jean Preston was by far the best conference planner ever in the state of Illinois. She started the Good Teaching Practices Conference in Carbondale, the only conference that was held in Carbondale. And she also started the Secondary Transition Conference, which was in Champaign, Illinois for many years. Now, Jean Preston was also our convention chair, our exhibits chair, but I just soaked up everything she could teach because, again, no one did conference planning better than Jean Preston in the state of Illinois. She also worked for the Illinois State Board of Education out of the Mount Vernon office as well. So, our history of convention planning is rich with all of the knowledge that we received from Jean Preston. And then we have, and still do have, a past President's Advisory Council. And here you see a picture of some of our past state presidents of Illinois CEC. And you also see this is student recognition. And one of the things that we like to do was have students create artwork, and then we would sell the artwork. Some of you may have some of the artwork. I do in our home have some of the artwork that children did, and then we framed it. And then on a few occasions, we actually had a gallery opening with all of the students' artwork, just to remind us what we are really all about. And then leadership kept moving up. So here is an example. Joyce Meyer, sorry, I didn't get all of your head in there, but Joyce Meyer is now a principal of a school, which is exciting. Liz Mackey is now a president of a Delta Kappa Gamma chapter, and Dr. Vinnie Hall is a former, actually the former secretary of the Illinois State Board of Education. And all of these ladies were presidents of the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children and have stayed active to this day, which is really very, very important. So we thank them. And then we have, of course, our leader today, Dr. Paula Crowley, very active, doing lots of good things for the field of special education. And we indeed thank her for putting this entire series of sessions together to help us honor the history of CEC. And I will just close with one of my favorite quotes from Ray Graham. This I learned from the shadow of a tree. My shadow will fall where I can never be. So we remember our history, and as we move forward, we have to remember all those wonderful lessons that we learned through the many years that special education has been here and has certainly been in the state of Illinois, and we appreciate the rich history of Illinois Council for Exceptional Children.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Bev. That was a tremendous journey through history in Illinois special education. And now we look forward to hearing from Iris and Joyce.
Hi, Bev, you did a great job. I was, I don't know a lot of that really stuff that you talked about. I started to know some of it, but it was really great. I have a couple comments to make. One is that I think we should do something like this again, because a huge part of what has happened with students with the old term mental retardation was not touched upon. I'm going to touch on that in a second, but Pam, I wanted to just make a few comments, Bev. When you talked about the Political Action Network, Charlie Zemer was the first chair of that. Yeah. And I happen to be honored as a student CEC, Illinois CEC member, to be on that committee. And who's the guy? Oh, Joe Bakke and I had to work.
Bakke from Quincy.
Right. We had to work on something together. I was a student and he was this big director of special ed. And I was like, but it really taught me a lot and it was wonderful. The other thing is about the CHIP bill. What I think that's very important to know that it really got its start because we had students with mental retardation and other, health issues where the parents could not leave their job because their children had pre-existing conditions. So the thing about the CHIP bill was so that the parents could get other health insurance. My ex-husband was in the insurance industry, and for me, unfortunately, I wasn't really happy with it, but the insurance industry took it to another level and started offering it to, I'm not saying anything bad, but the elderly and people with heart conditions, but it started for the kids with disabilities where their parents couldn't leave a job because their child needed the health insurance.
And interesting to note that legislation didn't give health insurance free to anybody. It allowed them to purchase health insurance at 150% of the current going rate for insurance policy.
It was expensive.
It was not cheap.
And just as another little note is when that bill got signed, Governor Thompson was at the Illinois building in Chicago and they had a presentation, and I got permission as a teacher. I took my student with intellectual disabilities on a field trip, and we got to go down there, and they got picked with the governor and got a pen that was used to sign all that. So it was really good. I'm glad you brought that up. The other thing is when you talked a little bit about Fred Weintraub. He actually helped write 94-142 of All Handicapped Children Act. He was one of the writers of that. And And the other thing I want to talk about, which I think is, as a teacher who taught students with mental retardation and developmental disabilities back in the day, which is now intellectual disabilities, I'd just like to talk about the beginning of public school education for those students. And when I was I think a junior or senior at Northern Illinois University, I volunteered at Dixon State Institution in 1972. And I learned about what was going on there. And we used to go every week to volunteer, and it made a big impact in my life. Not really realizing that 3 years later in 1975, I would be one of the very first teachers in the state of Illinois to teach children with mental. What happened was Governor Walker, he was the governor from 73 to 77, and they closed Dixon and Lincoln State institutions for the children and adults. And what happened was they were moved into these developmental centers across the state of Illinois. And whatever city or suburb or town had one of these developmental centers, and the children would be there, it became the responsibility of that school district to educate those children. And in Waukegan, they opened up what was called the Waukegan Developmental Center. And I was the first teacher in Waukegan to teach these students. And just for other teachers that are out there, in Northern Illinois, I got a degree for teaching EMH, TMH, and LED, trainable mentally handicapped. And I thought I was getting TMH students with an IQ of 35 to 55. That was what it was. But my students actually had IQs of 28 and below. And they didn't speak. And this actually their time to be with other students, really. I mean, they were allowed to corner and, pick those for 24 hours. Nobody really cared. And this was the first time where we had to get them all together in a school setting. And I did not have training in this. I was a TMH teacher. And what I very quickly realized is that my goals were up here, and I needed to set more realistic goals, and so that my students could reach those goals. And I used sign language, like to teach them toilet and what is your name. And I had to figure out a way. Of my 8 boys, it was all boys, of my 8 boys, only 1 could actually speak. And back in the day, I had some boys 18 to 13. And what was to the parents at that time, born with disability, who actually in the Jewish religion, it was like to have a shiva, and turn them over to the state of Illinois. None of these kids, except for 1, had parents. Their parent was the actual state of Illinois, except for 1 student who was 13 years old, whose parents had political connections. He had their son put at the Waukegan Developmental Center. He was 13 years old, and he got to be in my class. And it was a wonderful experience for that parent.
Give him these minutes.
Yes. So, but anyway, so I believe that it's important for people to know that it's significant in the process of moving the children with intellectual disabilities from institutions and from separate facilities. Like, we didn't talk about Julie Boy. They moved them from separate facilities into a public school education. And I have to tell you, I retired in 2011. And one of the greatest things when I was getting ready to leave is that students they were closing the Julia Malloy Center, and students with severe intellectual disabilities who were in institutions or separate facilities were now in a public high school. And to me, it made me cry. It gave me goosebumps. It's like, wow, finally. I mean, since for me, it was 1972, 73, or no, the kids, I started in 75 with the kids from Dixon State Institution. So from 1975 to 2010, 11, these kids were actually in a public school education. And they didn't call them, say that their disability was autism at the time. It was severe mental retardation. And so I just want to just say, Paula, that this has been a great opportunity to talk about the things, so much more that we could talk about in the history of CEC and Illinois CEC and special education in the state of Illinois.
Thank you so much, Iris. And I appreciate the stories you can tell and look forward to more of them at other occasions. Joyce, are you with us, I wonder? Joyce had, jump in, Joyce.
Hello, how is everyone?
We are fine. Looking forward to hearing from you, Joyce.
Okay.
Now you're going to respond to Bev's presentation, right? You're one of the respondents.
Oh, yes, yes. I just jumped on, so I have not yet heard all. Is she finished with hers?
Yes, she is. But your piece has to do with students and whatever you want to present. I know that you had a meeting as a school principal, that those things happen, don't they?
Oh, yes. So it's nice to join you. My name is Joyce Meyer. I've been involved with CEC since 1986 and started out as a student at Illinois State University and was involved with student CEC at the state level. And it was exciting to work with our university students. And as we move forward, we look at, I know Illinois had a very rich student CEC organization across the state. Some of our members even went on to the national level to become officers and serve internationally. So that's a wonderful honor. And I know that we had at least Bev, Iris, at least 3 Illinois presidents of CEC. Four presidents. So student CEC has shifted. I know that, and even when we look at pre-service teachers as well as current teachers, how have things changed over the years? As a principal, I look at, and looking at my district, the number of members that we're able to maintain, and how we are bringing on new members and really helping our teachers find the benefit of CEC. And I know that, Paula, as our new president, has done an amazing job of revitalizing and, bringing CEC to the forefront. And we need to continue to do so. I know just with just the present day and age that we're in right now, the commitment to an organization, any organization, not just CEC, but being a member of an organization, and how we started, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that whole mindset has shifted. And so how do we compete with that? Or what is our angle in maintaining and growing membership? And that's not just in CEC, that's in any organization. And so that's a struggle. So I think the value and everything that I learned through CEC and what I'm taking with me currently in my present position, we need to continue to press and to recruit. And I know Iris, starting in Illinois, our high school clubs, right, at Niles North. I know in Waukegan, we had a club for a few years, but we have to go back to that grassroots and how do we encourage interest and helping others learn and understand how we can support our individuals with disabilities, right?
Thank you very much, Joyce.
I just want to say though, that the Illinois ICEC high school clubs are still going right now, and some are still being started, but sometimes they get mixed up with, there's different groups at schools, the buddies and the pals and stuff. And the important thing is to show them that the CEC high school clubs are connected statewide, nationally, and internationally, and and I think it's important.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, thank you, Joyce. And I think, Joyce, you told me not long ago that you're the longest serving principal. Can you continue that sentence?
Oh, the longest serving educator as a in one district, in the same district. So I work for the Waukegan Public Schools, and the most veteran principal in the district.
Bravo, bravo, and especially what a tribute to Bob Abbott and Bill Vickers. It's wonderful, wonderful.
Definitely.
What
Definitely.
what a wonderful honor, Joyce.
Yes, again, growing up and learning about CEC I remember at Illinois State in my introduction to special ed class, and going to the fall convention, getting that excitement, and then connecting with people, and growing from there. That's what it's all about. And the honor of, yes, being recruited by Bill Vickers, longtime CEC member and wonderful friend, and Bob Abbott, who's just tremendous and internationally known. An honor to work with them and to kind of follow in their footsteps. So great privilege.
And I just want to say that Joyce, started as a Illinois student CEC president, and eventually became the state president. And she is not alone. We've had several of them. I even have a couple kids that were CEC high school club who went on to be student CEC presidents, and then ICEC presidents as well. So, but also, I don't know if this was true, Joyce, when you got hired, but when I got hired first in Waukegan and by Bill Vickers, like one of the first questions is not to me, but to his, because I met him through ICEC, which is for students. That's a great way to get a job, is to go to the CEC conventions and meet directors of special ed and network. But I remember him saying that when somebody would come into his office, he'd say, "Are you a member of CEC?" And that's, he would like to hire them. And if they weren't, they soon were a member right away after they got hired. So it's great networking. And I think that's something we should truly encourage. I used to take my high school club students to the state ICEC conventions, and many of them became special education teachers after that. So it's about networking, and really I'm so looking forward to getting back to having live ICEC conventions so we can share our ideas and have camaraderie and network and learn from each other.
Thank you, Iris. Now, a very interesting development occurred this summer that I want to share with you. And I'm going to share my screen because April Anderson-Zorn, more than likely, she's busy at Illinois State University tonight due to the big thing that's happening. And Joyce, before I forget, good luck next year. Tomorrow is the first day back. The students are back for the first time tomorrow. And good luck to everybody who is waiting for students tomorrow and the next few days. But let me share with you this little piece of video. So just let me do a little small bit of technological gymnastic here, and hopefully I can make this happen. Where is she now? Let's see. Where I must have her paused somewhere. Let's see. Here, but it isn't. Oh, maybe it's here. No, pausing to share.
Whoever that is, she sure is cute.
No, does anybody I don't know why when I press
Is it the arrow below her neck?
That little arrow in the middle, maybe?
oh, is there an arrow in the middle? I
See right
don't see an
there?
arrow. Is there an
Down
arrow
further.
here? Is there an arrow here?
Right here.
All arrow down. Down on her dress.
I
A
don't
little
see it.
further
Oh,
down.
okay,
little
I think
further
I know
down.
how I can get rid of all the, there's a load of information on my screen, you know. So there's a bar on the bottom on my screen, so I know exactly what's going on.
Go
Oh,
below the bar, go below directly south of her necklace.
Right. Now, a little more down.
Down,
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 a little
down,
more, a little
more
more.
down,
Little
down.
more. Can
Can
you
you
go down any further?
is this, do I go further?
Yes, go further
yes.
down.
Wow, this is the end of my,
Oh,
Nope, okay.
oh, I wish I could make this happen. Stop the video, maybe stop the video. I know what that would do more than likely. How
See if you can't go down any further, okay.
it says seek. Wow, that's
Let's see if I can go down, let's see. No, I mean, I can go down, but I'm not a co-host now.
oh
I would
god.
just, I would
You
just
know-
drag her arrow, just go down, even though she can't see it, I drag it down.
Mhm.
See now, Bev. I thought you were.
But remember, I got disconnected.
Oh, good, Bev. Thanks for reminding me. A good point.
Yeah, so try to.
Let's see if you can access the arrow that I'm not accessing.
let's see.
I just made you co-host, Bev.
Okay, and I just clicked on that arrow and it's not doing anything.
So interesting.
I think it's because the video is going to be presented from your device, Dr. Crawley. I'm wondering if there's a link that maybe you can send to Bev and she can pull it up as co-host.
Yeah, that would have been a very good idea. Yeah.
You try to unshare and reshare your screen.
There's another right.
And let's see now. Hopefully now we can get her. We are very, we understand and expect dilemmas, don't we? So let's see. So unshare. So stop sharing. And then reshare my screen.
Try to pull it up again.
So I go right here now. And see, yeah. Where it is.
You may want to try unsharing, press play, and then reshare if you have access to that button, because then it looks like you can at least drag the video back if we miss any parts, if you're able to see the play button when it's not being shared.
You know, that's a lot you just said. So let me just, yeah, that's a lot you just said. So let me just see. I know exactly what's going on, you know, but the thing that's puzzling me is why my wonderful little, I had it up and ready to roll. See now if I can. Amazing things that happen. You know, okay. I don't know.
Again, as we sit here and wait, I'm going to break the silence and just bring up the fact of, as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Elizabeth Farrell, can you imagine what the meetings look like, 99 years ago from this point on, as we sit here and try to figure out and technological gymnastic this, as Dr. Crowley said. I love that. but just what we can do now in meetings and how we're meeting. It's just so strange and intriguing.
Thank you, Cody. You're very, very kind. Let me just see which of these will work. Maybe. Let's see, Cody, if we can get, this is the archivist, by the way, and now.
Okay, now.
My name is April Anderson-Zorn, and I'm
No.
the University.
Are we all ready for her?
Yes.
I'm so relieved. There's so many ways to share her, actually, Cody. You know, like, will you share her this way or that way, or this way or that way, or this way or that way? So here I am, found a way. So now she speaks very rapidly, so let's be ready.
My name is April Anderson-Zorn, and I'm the University Archivist for the Dr. Joanne Rayfield Archives at Illinois State University. The Rayfield Archives is part of Milner Library, the library for Illinois State University. Though named the Rayfield Archives, we're the official repository for the history of the university and named for my predecessor, Dr. Joanne Rayfield. I'm here today to talk to you, the membership of the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children, to say thank you. Thank you for entrusting your history to the Rayfield Archives. Your materials are an important part of many historical stories. Among them, the history of Illinois State University and the history of education in both the state of Illinois and the United States. I'd like to take a few minutes to talk to you about what will happen next, what archiving your materials with the Rayfield Archives means, and the opportunities it presents for our students and patrons. Well, now that the materials are here at our facility, they will be archivally processed, reviewed for preservation concerns, and made available to researchers. All of these things that I mentioned are part of our overall mission to collect, protect, and provide access to all aspects of Illinois State University history. So what does that mean to archivally process, protect, and provide access to materials? Well, for starters, we'll add them to a list of collections waiting for archives processing. With just myself and 2 other archivists on staff, we are incredibly busy working with incoming materials and collections that require special attention. We rely heavily on interns and volunteers to make our materials available to patrons and researchers from right here in Illinois State and around the world. I often tell visitors to our facility that the Rayfield Archives is more than a repository. We're an archives laboratory, giving hands-on experiences and opportunities to future archivists, librarians, public historians, museum professionals, and other students of the humanities and library sciences. Your board has graciously agreed to fund a stipend for students to work on processing the collection, which not only makes your materials available for research faster, but gives students interested in the archives field professional experience. The Illinois Council for Exceptional Children Materials will offer these students a unique opportunity to learn archival processing firsthand and use processing and description skills according to the standards set forth by our national professional organization, the Society of American Archivists, and other similar groups. The materials will be sorted, described, and a detailed research guide will be created for the collection and made available online. While this doesn't mean the materials themselves will be accessible online, anyone, anywhere in the world will be able to use the guide to find materials relevant to their needs and can then ask us for access during a scheduled research appointment. During archival processing, materials will be examined for any preservation concerns. We work closely with Milner Library's Preservation Lab to address concerns we may have for long-term use of archival materials. We then rehouse the materials in acid-free boxes and folders. Once materials have been evaluated and processed, they will be made available to anyone interested in researching the collection. We can provide digitization services to select materials through our digitization center at Milner Library. We also have worked closely with multiple constituents, both in the region and around the country, to safely and securely display materials in physical exhibits. We pride ourselves on not only giving important collections of ISU history a home here at Rayfield Archives, but that we get to tell ISU's story and the stories of the people that have made this institution so great. If you have questions about anything that I've mentioned or want to know more about the Rayfield Archives, please email me at the address on your screen. My motto is to touch history, because if you touch history, you're part of it. So many students and researchers will soon get to be part of your long history. So happy 100th anniversary. I look forward to digging into the Illinois Council for Exceptional Children's materials and getting to work.
Lovely. Thank you
That was great.
so much. Yes, April is very articulate woman, and I would love to put in the chat that she did have her email available, and it is simply AA_2. Let me see if I can type that into here. So
Under two.
so it's AA. So it's AA. Why am I not getting? Okay. And so it's AA. Well, it's A_2, right? And it is at. All right. And so AA. So it's A_2. A_2. And if ever you're down around here, she is so hospitable, you know, she'll take you to visit. This happened in July, by the way. That's why I thought it'd be very nice for everybody to know a little more detail about the archives, because it just happened in July in 2022, just magnificently on time for this special evening, you know.
And I'd like to tell everybody that in those things that were brought there is a huge file box of all of Ray Graham's speeches. That he had, each one of his speeches or comments was in an individual file, and it's all in there. And it's, some of the stuff in there is amazing. So any students or anybody who wants to learn about the history of special ed, and what's amazing to me as I read through all those, not every single one, but a lot of them, was that what's going on today, he talked about, what, 80 years ago? I don't know.
Wow, that's interesting. Now that's a lovely, you know, with the word segue makes me, comes into my mind. Melissa, what's going on today? Is it true what Iris just said? That
Hi, Paula. It is true. I first of all, it's an honor to be among so many CEC pioneers tonight on the 100th anniversary. So thanks for inviting me. I'm Melissa Taylor. I am Assistant Superintendent in charge of special education in Belleville in our high school district. And I'm also the newly appointed Executive Director of the Illinois Alliance of Administrators of Special Education. So we are the case unit for Illinois CEC. And I was fortunate to meet Paula this summer at the Special Education Legislative Summit. Paula represented your organization very well, and I would encourage you to consider sending a bigger team next summer, because it's a fantastic event where we can advocate on Capitol Hill for things that are important in the life of students with disabilities, but also educators with disabilities and public education. A lot of things are not that different now. One of the things that you all probably know is that IDEA has not been reauthorized since 2004, should be reauthorized every 5 years. No one really wants it reauthorized now in the current political climate, right? Because who knows how that would go. So we didn't even advocate for that this summer, didn't even talk about it. Previous summers, when things were less divisive, that was a big topic, but not so much right now. The federal government continues to fund only about 15% of the total cost of special education, far from the promised 40% when Public Law 94-142 was initially passed. But we do have a piece of legislation introduced in the House and the Senate right now. A glide path to full funding is what they're calling it. It's a 10-year plan to get up to the 40%. In the Senate, it's Senate Bill 3213, and in the House, it's 5984. The likelihood of that to pass, of course, is not all that strong, but our Illinois delegation has strongly supported it in a bipartisan way. So that is something that I think we're all proud of. And we even had a couple of our Illinois representatives sign on to the full funding bill after our advocacy work this summer. So just as Bev said, never doubt that your voice makes a big difference. It certainly does. Let's see, I want to talk a little bit about the teacher shortage in the state of Illinois. And it's nationwide, of course, but in our state, just in reported unfilled positions for last school year, there were 3,347 reported unfilled positions in the state of Illinois. I anticipate that number will be much higher this year. Of those unfilled positions, 56% of the shortages last year were related to special education, whether it be teachers, paraprofessionals, school nurses, school psychologists. So the staff shortage is real, and it's certainly problematic for students as class sizes have gotten bigger. I have colleagues who've had to collapse special education sections to make classes bigger because they simply don't have teachers. So that's something that's scary. There's lots of reasons why. I'm sure that all of you on the call have your own thoughts about some of those reasons. But research shows that things like the challenging working conditions for special education teachers, not only just the demands that we might face with students who might be challenging, but the paperwork is excessive, and that hasn't gotten any less burdensome on teachers since the inception of the field. So that's a real problem, and it's a reason why it's not uncommon for special education teachers to decide they want to try their hand at general ed. They'd like to get away from the paperwork, the IEP meetings, what they sometimes feel like is kind of excessive involvement of parents that teachers sometimes feel. So that's one of the reasons special education teachers in some districts are sort of on an island, right? They feel isolated. They don't feel like they have enough support. The cost of higher ed is another reason that keeps folks from entering education. Our state really needs to do a better job of incentivizing folks to become special education teachers, related service personnel, more things like loan forgiveness, teacher shortage scholarships, things like that, which I know is no surprise. Those of you who've been doing this work a long time have dealt with this before. Illinois also has had significant credentialing barriers. Up until recently, we did not have reciprocity with any other state. So folks would come here from other states, fully licensed as special education teachers, and have to take classes or at the very least an assessment in order to become licensed in Illinois. So now we have reciprocity, which is great, but at the same time, the problem is at a point where we're lowering standards for our teachers in order to get them licensed through emergency provisional licenses and things like that, which of course, I don't think is good for our kids. But that's the current state of things. In terms of innovation, because Illinois has such a funding disparity between wealthy districts and poorer districts, there are IAASC sponsors innovative practices grants every year. And there are teachers who propose grants related to inclusive practices and co-teaching, right? Which for many folks, that doesn't seem very innovative at all. But because of their location, their setting, their resources, that does seem innovative. But there's some amazing things going on in the field related to augmentative communication, technology, transition. We have many programs where students are creating micro businesses where they're crafting items, creating items, selling them, starting small businesses. So there's some neat things going on in that area. Legislatively, probably one of the most significant things that has happened recently is a ban on restraint and timeout. RTO is how it's being referred to at the state level. Every district has had to submit a plan to reach a goal that will eventually take them to 0 incidents of restraint or timeout. Probably unsafe in many ways, but that's at the forefront legislatively in Illinois. There's sort of this notion that if we train people well enough, there would never be a need to restrain a student or use an isolated timeout. So teachers are dealing with that. Schools, administrators are dealing with that, trying to make sure that they're providing as much training and as much support as possible for students and teachers so that we can minimize the use of those restrictive interventions as much as possible. And another thing that's at the legislative forefront every year, although Illinois has not had much legislation pass in this area, we continue to see a lot of legislation introduced around dyslexia, and lots of advocates who want dyslexia to stand alone as a specific learning disability. They don't like the way that we describe dyslexia as a learning disability in reading. So there's lots of advocacy around that area as well. And then you talked about, Iris, you talked so eloquently about students moving into more inclusive settings and away from private facilities and residential facilities. And we're sort of heading the other direction at this point. There's a lot of, there's what's being referred to as the residential crisis in the state right now, where districts, parents are really wanting students placed residentially, and those placements don't exist. Appropriate placements aren't available. And some of the placements that are available are probably just as questionable as some that you referred to that were closed many years ago. So I'm not sure how far we've come in that area. Illinois has a high incidence of private day placements as well. So while we have some amazing things going on in our public schools, in some areas we might have taken some steps forward, but also it feels like we might be taking a few steps back right now. The best part of our job, of course, is our students, our teachers. We have amazing teachers who are very dedicated to the field. We just need more of them. So we appreciate the work, that ISU does and that our university partners do, trying to help train teachers, because our state trained teachers are excellent. We just don't have enough of them.
Melissa, if I can pop in, Paula?
Absolutely.
Years ago, Bev and Joyce, I don't know if you remember, CEC had a project on teacher working conditions, special ed teacher working conditions.
Right.
I don't know where that is or whatever happened, but you are absolutely right. I have several special ed teachers that were my mentees at Niles North, and now they're in the English and reading department. The whole thing, and this is probably not the right place to say this, but you were right when you said the working conditions and the paperwork and stuff. And reality is there are a lot of parts of the IEP that an administrative assistant could do, and then just ask the teacher about the progress, or get the scores and yada yada yada. And if schools could hire somebody to do the physical part of the IEP and just ask the teachers for their input for the specific parts, I really believe that something like that would, really help, because it's not just the IEP, but it's doing the progress monitoring and all the other things, because the honest to God truth, Melissa, is that people go into teaching because they want to teach. They want to teach children. They love children. They want to teach them and be excited and get goosebumps because the student learned 2 + 2 is 4. You know, it got through. And those teachers, those people, those two students they're still out there, but they get in these jobs and their dream of wanting to teach is taken away from them. I believe, and I know this probably sounds stupid, but I believe the ability to teach is something God-given. You're born with this ability to relate to children. It's just something inside you and you want to do it. But when you get into the building and you have all these other constraints on you, I mean, at one point while I was teaching, I felt like I was just a facilitator. I had like 5 peer educators in my classroom and I was just a facilitator. I wasn't doing what I loved, Melissa. I love kids. I want to teach. And I believe that's why we're losing the teachers.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you've said. You're right.
Interesting. So wonderful to hear you be so articulate about the current needs, Melissa, and you know the similarities with the journey of our field over the decades. You know, even Beverley started with 1800s. You know, and it seems to me that the needs there may change a little bit, like technology obviously is such a bigger part of our lives today than in the past, but the challenges, there are new challenges, and some of them may be nuanced differently, but definitely you know, modern challenges that we really need to work together to be innovative with, and maybe indeed go back and learn some of the lessons that Beverley talked about. You know, donate a day. Maybe we need to do some things like that in Springfield. You know, possibly we need to start rethinking some of the wonderful lessons that we've learned. Now, believe it or not, the time is just zooming by on us, as we expect, of course. And thank you, Melissa, for all that, and all the respondents as well. And I'd love now to hear Jamillah tell us about your perception. And I'm going to share my screen with Jamillah. Jump in, Jamillah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. I know that our time is going very quickly, and this has been so rich. I want to thank you, everyone who's helped to put this on and who's spoken, but particularly Dr. Crowley. Thank you. I'm so honored to be invited to share my view in the areas in which I see future Illinois innovators in special education will be compelled to excel. And what I'm talking about is where I feel like, first of all, we all got into this field, like you said earlier. We all agreed because we want to teach and passionate about. We know we have not lost where our passion lies. And that's something about special education personnel, whether they're teachers or paraprofessionals or administrators. We will not ever lose sight of why we got into what we got into. We're doing a lot of things well, and a lot of things that are not going so well for us. Many of those things, if you look at it, it's outside of our grasp. It's people making decisions outside of our field that's impacting us and our students and our families and the communities. And so what I want to talk about is not necessarily what I see us being compelled to excel in the future because of where we lack. I'm not talking about it from a point of lack, but where we have where we're just in growing, because we're in a field that's dynamic, and we're a field of people serving, and people's needs. We're continually finding out change, and the community's needs change. And so because of that, we are compelled to change. A little bit about me: I'm a learning behavior specialist of 28 years. Over the years, I've taught in grades K through 12 and also in higher education. Most recently, my teaching has been as a clinical and instructional assistant professor at Illinois State University, where I had the privilege of supervising teacher candidates, pre-service teachers, in all 3 of their clinical experiences But in the past 2 years, I've moved from that, not out of the field of special education, but moved from that into more broad, where I'm serving all of the students at Illinois State University as Assistant Director of Curriculum Services. I earned a bachelor's in special ed and a master's in curriculum and instruction. And I'm right now a PhD candidate in educational administration. And the reason why I am doing what I'm doing right now is so I can get back into teaching future special education teachers. I was talking with Dr. Crowley recently and sharing with her how I envision how we're going to be compelled to prepare our future teachers in this beautiful field. And I don't think that it is it's even something that we can say we might do. I think it's something that we must do. Thank you so much for sharing, giving me screen capabilities of sharing. Can you all see?
This is beautiful. We can see. Carrie,
not that. What are you able to see?
we just lost whatever you were showing. Oh, now we can see.
Oh, you can see it now?
Characteristics of effective special education teacher.
Okay, great. So basically, really quickly, you all can take a look at this list. I don't need to read it to you, but these are, I just scoured all of the professional special education websites and other sites that may not be as reputable but still credible. And I just gathered as many characteristics of special education teachers, effective special education teachers, that I can get, and many of these continue to be repeated. But one of the things that I noticed is that many of these characteristics are soft skills. If you notice that, many of them are soft skills that makes us effective special education teachers. And what I noticed, yes, what I have found in teaching and preparing future teachers is that we're missing something. We are missing critical reflection. We are preparing our future teachers right now, our teacher candidates, to get out there and be empathetic, and get out there and be compassionate and be organized, and be we're getting them to get out there and be communicators and learn how to collaborate and listen and be creative. Oh, we just have to. Lots of wonderful skills like that, but skills that I believe are essential and that are missing. And it's not even necessarily what I believe, it's what I've seen over the past going on 3 decades, is that we are remiss right now in preparing our special education teachers to think about their thinking about their teaching. Now, we all know how important it is to be reflective educators. Reflection is huge, is monumental to us continually developing and being better and more effective. But many times our reflection has questions like, how did that lesson go? And those questions that we ask ourselves, and we teach our future teachers to ask themselves, are questions that don't always interrogate or challenge what has been missing. Now, data-based reflection, that means using the data, the results, to be able to guide us. We're moving more into the critical, but what we are not doing is going even further and asking ourselves, what might we be missing as the primary assessment tools? We as teachers are really the primary assessment tools in the classroom. We can bring in some other tools, but ultimately, we are the primary one. And if we are truly the primary assessment tool, how are we making sure that our assessments are valid? We have to be more critical of ourselves. And so those wonderful soft skills that our special education teacher candidates are getting out there, really exhibiting and really showing off, because we are excellent educators and essential in the schools, we still must go further, and I see our future innovators in special education being capable and competent and even challenging and interrogating their belief systems, their understandings, their ways. Now, a lot of times people don't think that interrogation or challenge are good words. It's like the word discipline. Nobody likes that word, but it's also important. But that's the only way we can push back. And that's what we've talked about for the past hour and a half is how special education has come to the place it is, because we have constantly pushed back at what others have said should be. And we've always said, no, have you looked at, have you considered, are we looking at, are we providing? So we are a field that has been known that we push back and challenge and interrogate to make sure that we are including. One of the ways that I see our future innovators in special education, and particularly my commitment is to the teacher candidates, those who are preparing right now in college to be future special education teachers. What I see is our ability to prepare them to be competent to investigate and to interrogate themselves, how they assess in the classroom. And I want to know, I wanted to tell you why very quickly, why this is important right now, today. We're talking about the future, but today is the beginning of the future. I don't know if you all, probably you're aware that ISBE recognizes how imperative it is that we prepare our future teachers to be culturally responsive, and so much so that they have passed culturally responsive teaching and leading standards for Illinois. And those standards are, we are accountable here in higher education and teacher preparation programs to prepare our future teachers to be culturally responsive. In order to do that, we are helping to help them to engage in self-reflection in a way that's beyond just how did that lesson go and did I include everybody, but even the why behind that. Why didn't I? Or what is missing? Or in what ways? Just changing our questions in self-reflection. We're compelled to. The state of Illinois has given us 3 years as teacher preparation programs, 3 years to get ourselves together so we can begin to be accountable to these standards. And they were passed in, I believe it was March of 2021, so just a year and a half ago. We have another year and a half to work on this. Another reason why this is important is because 22 days ago, just 22 days ago, the U.S. Department of Education provided essential guidance to help schools to avoid discriminatory use of discipline against students with disabilities. I'm not going to go into those details right now, but I do want you to visit the ISBE website, look up culturally responsive teaching and leading standards, and then also look up the new guidance that was passed just July 19th, last month, from the U.S. Department of Education, who is providing crucial guidance to help schools to avoid this discriminatory use of discipline against our students. In order to make sure that we are aligning our teaching philosophy and our ways and our practices with those two very recent passages, we want to make sure that our future special education teachers are able to think critically about and interrogate and challenge their own perceptions, their own beliefs, their own why they do what they do. In addition to the wonderful things that we're already doing, this has been missing. And so that's why I see we are going to be compelled to grow in. So thank you so much for allowing me to talk.
Thank you. Thank
Dr.
you.
Crowley, if you don't mind, I just wanted to pop on here, and I kind of want to merge what Melissa.
So sorry, Cody. I think you were supposed to follow Melissa. I'm
That's
so
okay.
sorry. I
That's
completely
okay.
forgot. Go for it, dear.
No, this is perfect because actually I want to streamline what Melissa was talking about as our present and and kind of turn those into positive outcomes for our future, as what Jamillah was saying. And so one of the, I just have a few simple bullet points. I won't take long because I know we're almost done here. But with the teacher shortage, and I do agree, Melissa, that removing some of the stipulations and some of the regulations we have to let teachers into our buildings to educate our future adults and leaders of the world can be scary, but it can also be a good thing. We're letting these people come in because we have a teacher shortage. And so I think it's really going to be the test of, do you want to teach? Is this for you? And if it is, they're going to absolutely love it and have people surrounding them that will absolutely help them be the best educators that they can be. And so I think it's going to be the true test, honestly. I also feel that, I think if they're looking at limiting EdTPA, that's not for certain, but right now it is. And I am a firm believer, whether I can say this here or not, that perhaps getting rid of that assessment would be okay. But as for the other assessments, I do believe that they are going to keep those, and I think they are needed. And I completely agree with you, Melissa, on those things. As for the amount of paperwork in the present, yes, it is a lot. and I am extremely exhausted of all the paperwork that we have to do, but something that's exciting and that we get to look forward to in the future, given all the errors that we have in technology is growing, and it's growing fast. And if you look at the paperwork and how we complete it online right now, I mean, think of how you had to fill out IEP forms even just 10 years ago compared to how you fill them out with the many programs that are available to us. And I think as time goes and we are recognized that we don't have time for this, I think the technology is going to advance and it's going to streamline that process for us. And hopefully that we can see a better outcome and saving time for our teachers. With the cost of higher education, it is extremely high. It's crazy how much we have to pay to be able to serve the children in this field. But something that's great right now, and that's going to lead to us having more teachers in the future, is that a lot of districts are actually paying for their aides. Usually as a teacher, some districts will reimburse your grad coursework, but currently I mean, there are multiple districts, including mine that I currently teach in. We are reimbursing aides to be able to get their teaching license. And I think that's just incredible. I think it shows that we respect them, that we need them, and that we want to invest in them. And so I think that is one of the biggest gifts that we can give paraeducators. Previously, before being a teacher, I was an aide. I was an aide for 10 years. And had someone say, I want to invest in your education because you are going to be a great teacher, would have been amazing. And I think that would have flourished my abilities and my vision of what my future looks like. And so I think we're going to see some great outcomes with that. And then lastly, I wanted to just comment on the inclusion aspect. There's a thought that sometimes we get away from inclusion and best practices, and then also inclusion is actually becoming a wonderful and appropriate thing in schools. My building alone, we went from having 4 instructional and life skills classes down to 2 because we don't serve as many students as we used to. And that's because they're going into co-taught classes in the general ed setting. We actually have 90% of our students who receive student support services through IEPs and 504s attending general education courses and not in instructional programs. And I think that's absolutely amazing because when I started in 2014 as an aide, you betcha I was in the life skills courses working in there because that's where a majority of our students were. And so we're seeing that move of keeping students contained in those rooms to pushing them out. And I think it's just absolutely amazing. And I do think that we are going to see more positions for resource and co-taught setting. So thank you for letting me comment. That's just my little tidbits on what the present kind of looks like for me and the positive outcomes I see for our future.
Cody, I just want to say one thing, and that is somebody needs to do some type of research to find out how well those students are succeeding in those gen ed classes. Because in my reality, from my friends that are teaching in the high school level, they are not succeeding well. And when I did have a more self-contained life skills class, I'm still very much friendly with a lot of my students, and my students are still in employer paid positions 20, 30 years out of high school. And they got the education that they needed so that they could succeed. I'm not against inclusion. I think inclusion is phenomenal. I love it. But every child deserves a curriculum that's commensurate with their cognitive ability. And you always have to look at what's happening after they're not in school anymore. Can they take care of themselves? And my students are living in apartments by themselves and taking public transportation. And believe me, they would never be where they are today if they were in all gen ed classes.
So I completely agree. One thing that I can speak on behalf of my district I work for, I can't speak on all districts, but transition is an entire different entity in our school. And so, yes, do I mention that we're out of those self-contained, those instructional programs, life skills? Yes, but we do have hours that not only are they in biology maybe, or US history, being in co-taught setting, they are attending a transition program. We actually just invested a lot of money, I won't say the amount, into a PACE lab. And so students go in there, they work, and we have a 95%, in fact, I think it was like 96 point something percent of student placement out in the community. And it's amazing. And I will say that, yes, that is something that cannot be forgotten. And so I hope other districts are doing the research such as what we did and such as you mentioned.
That's great.
Making sure that they are having those outcomes.
And we also have to make sure that we're always, providing that full continuum of services for our students. And as I said, there are times where that co-teaching and the inclusive settings are just amazing for students. Does it work for everyone? Not always. And so being open and not really advocating for our students and not trying to pigeonhole. We know it comes down sometimes to the dollar. It comes down to legislation. And sometimes, again, we have to be advocates for our students. Our teachers have to be advocates for our students. And I know that, our parents, how can we support our parents to help them learn to advocate for their children?
And coming back to the 100th anniversary of CEC and Elizabeth Farrell, that's exactly what she wanted to have done 100 years ago, right? To support the parents and to give the students the education that they deserve in a public school education.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's 8 o'clock. And Jamillah, thank you for being with us. And please come back, everybody, because we should do this again, as somebody said already. And Jamillah, share your data with us as you generate your data for your dissertation, and Cody too. You're both students, and I'm so excited to have your responses and your insights. And it is 8:01, and I feel so very deeply thankful. And I toast to Elizabeth Farrell and to all the people who followed in her footsteps all over. And we want to see more special education, not less of it, and in every corner of our planet, So please join us again for future events. And of course, thank you, Cody, for for mentioning earlier the CEC convention. And I have a meeting with our program committee on Friday evening, and honestly, we have some ideas here tonight that there's so many possibilities for our gathering on the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th of November this year. Good luck to all of you who are teachers, who are administrators, who are right there ready to hear what's going on in schools, supportive to our students and our teachers and our parents. And let us all be generous and stretch ourselves to do what we can in the footsteps of Elizabeth Farrell. So thank you, everybody. And I will say goodnight. Before I do that, is there any pressing last minute thing that I should address?
I just thank everybody for being here. It's great.
Yes, it was very special. All over the state of Illinois represented, north, south, east, and west. And we look forward, and indeed, even a doctoral student from South America, right? So, all right. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all at other times. And thanks again to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do connect with me if you'd like to be involved in ICEC. Thank you.